Welcome back to a new episode of something we're now calling the Verts. So we're taking iMac, shifting iMac to the Verts. And Verts is short for verticals. So I think this is a recognition of the evolution of our conversation that we've been having, which has started at inside multifamily access control and is now shifted to an overall conversation around verticals. So with me, as always, is Colin. Colin, how you doing?
Doing well. Excited to make this transition and get deeper into some other verticals.
Yeah, and I guess that's the thing. We're seeing a lot change within the software introduction, if you would, in the conversations that are happening, whether it's with the ecosystem or the end users and the rest. And we thought it was important to now take that and really expand beyond that to drive I would call it a much broader conversation, probably more, it's funny, as we go broad, it probably even gets more specific because we'll start to differentiate between the different verticals, which will then highlight, even multifamily. If we talk about enterprise, we talk about hospitality, whatever it might be. It's going to start to highlight the differences in that area. So this is more of a modern conversation, in my opinion, around actually what's happening in the market. I mean, what are you seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as you often see with the industry, that residential side is so consumer focused, right? And the end user being the resident or the tenant. And so often that is a leading indicator of where the industry is going and what's the next evolution. And you're starting to see that the demand of workplace apps and the demand of employee engagement as opposed to resident engagement is starting to become reality. And where does the security and, more importantly, the access piece really fit into that? As we've talked about on the iMac side of it, and now I think is pertinent to move into these other verticals, is the idea of access as a part of the bigger solution and not so much access control, but access as a whole of the experience and things of that nature. It's just, I think it fits in really well to some of these other verticals and starting to identify where do we fit, how do we play in that space. So I'm excited for it.
Yeah, so access control is a feature of a larger value proposition, or access control is a feature. Definitely seeing that, especially, it's historically been in the high security side, and then the belief is that more conveniences and the rest of it would become less secure. But I think we've moved beyond that conversation. So when we take a look at those different verticals, we've got of course hospitality, we've got multifamily that we talked about. There's the enterprise, there's the medical. I think we can get into airports. Really, all across just about anywhere that this is happening, because now, like you said, with the introductions of software and people's expectations as a whole overall around the idea that they want to start to have unique experiences that speak to those. The other part, like you did say too, is it's getting really confusing to understand sort of where one ends and one begins when it comes to the ecosystem side of it. In some respects, some of these, tenant experience applications or building operating systems, it's bleeding the lines of what is an access control system at this point. And I think there's room for all of them. So there's going to be sort of impacts that come into it. Who are the players that come into it? The way that we sell and we market and tell the conversation is changing on that side. Who we partner with is changing. Now we got some that are competing with people that we partner with. That's like a big secret that's been going on for a long time. But now it's even more overt, and it's actually almost seen as a feature to have that, where you can go into a project where before it was seed to flower, you had to win the entire thing in order to get it to where now you can decide and say, you know what, I'm going to give up my visitor management system because X does that better, and I'm going to focus on the lock side of it and maybe the credentialing. So the entire way is changing.
Yeah, the importance of co-opetition is something that I think is super exciting right now and critical in the strategy that you take to each project, right? In being focused, how do you expand your viewpoint beyond that single project focus and use co-opetition to your advantage? is critically important. And you were starting to, we were seeing that big time in the multifamily space. And now you're starting to see it migrate into, as you term it, kind of the enterprise, and how do you start to define that enterprise solution within your product set is super important right now.
Yeah. So let's jump on that just a little bit to give us sort of a flavor of what to expect. So you bring up the enterprise, and that's been a conversation. My belief is, just like we saw in hospitality, just like we're seeing currently right now in multifamily, the next one to go is the enterprise. And what I mean by the next one to go is this sort of verticalization need of where access control and security as a whole, I think video and everything else, identity management, visitor management, all of those is changing to a very vertical specific solution that is going to be needed, even to the point where I'm noticing even mainstream sort of media or tech media as well. I mean, this morning there was one from New York Times. I saw one this morning from The Information. You have a lot of people talking about these applications now that are working with the access control systems, where historically, those domains they didn't really get into. They didn't look at that. But now we're starting to see this use case develop of needing features and really call it care around how we bring solutions. And what I've noticed with all of them is the access control side of how people get in and out, and the identity side is sort of a linchpin into the entire ecosystem and success or failure of these applications. Because when it comes down to it, ordering a latte is cool, I guess, but really it's not fundamental to what needs to get done. But utilizing my phone to get into a building, or using my phone with a relationship to, say, a health attestation application, to whether I can use a conference room, or how I do teaming, utilizing video to see who's in the space, to know if we want to collaborate on a project that day, whatever it might be. Getting access is a critical part to the success and failure of these applications. And really our systems and our locks and all the products that we have need to be able to support that. So I believe the demand for those are going to increase. But the problem that we have, in my opinion, is if you were to ask anybody in our industry, let's say we asked 50 people, and you were to say, define for me what the enterprise is, we would get 50 different answers. Whether it's Fortune 100, 500, it's small, large, whatever it might be. And as an industry, I think we need to start to have a language that we can align around. Do we?
I guess. I mean, I think so. I think the other way to approach it, though, is for so long we've tried to align things in this high security piece, right? And if we can truly start to shift that to that horizontal approach and recognize that across an enterprise, different buildings are going to require different solutions. And how do we allow that enterprise to deploy those different solutions in the right locations, right? And that could mean an enterprise has 50 locations, or an enterprise has 2 locations. I don't know if it's so much about defining enterprise as it is as recognizing this transition from where I used to say on the multifamily side, on the security aspect, nobody chose where they work based on the lock that they used and how they got into the workplace, right? But a renter or a tenant may decide where they live and whether they rent from a location based on their interaction at the front door and at their unit door. Well, now you're starting to experience that in the workplace, and how they interact with gaining access to a remote office or a conference room within the building, or the gate that they have to pass through to get into the building. They may choose, it won't be the only factor in whether they work at a place likely, but it may be a significant factor in how they interact with that. And how do we recognize that and bring that into the forefront of enterprise? I'm not so sure it's defining is enterprise Fortune 100 or enterprise Fortune 500. I think it's understanding that enterprise means I can't deliver a one-size-fits-all solution to this enterprise. I need to be able to meet this enterprise at their demands for all of their various locations.
So, and that's interesting, because that's actually part of what I'm talking about as well too, is that historically we try to define the enterprise by size, where now maybe around functionality and what's being done, right? So that's actually what we'll dig into some of those things, because the language that we've been using before is typically like how many locations do they have, how many employees do they have, how many doors do they have, things like that may not matter at this point, because it's actually about the functionality. And I think that the old way we did it, when it was about the lock and it had to be a physical thing, it was defined by that. But now with the software side, it's more about the functionality, which is interesting on that side. And you bring up another one that I think is a totally different conversation in my opinion, but one that we should probably have is, I do believe we're getting to the point now where you're going to see how people access and interact with the buildings, which is very heavy on our systems, that the direct correlation to engagement, to the same way of like, if it's hard, like let's take your banking app or your banking website. If it's a pain in the ass to put your username, password, and the rest of it in there, and you can't get in, it actually makes you not want to work with that bank, right? Mm-hmm. Where I think we're going to get to the point where it's sort of the website or the equivalent to the user experience that happens in the spaces is going to actually make an impact on whether systems get selected and stay. And one thing that I don't know yet, that maybe we can have some conversations with people, is, are we getting to the point where, if you think about the historical moat in our industry, was once you got your product installed, it was there for the next 30 years. To where now, are we getting to the point where if a company's engagement scores go down, or there's an NPS score to their space and it's not that good because of the way that the experience is when I try to enter and exit a building, will now budgets open to do rip and replace, to put systems in that do support it? I don't know. What do you think of that? Yeah, I saw your reaction on your face, but I'm curious. What do you think? Like, can you see access control systems get ripped out, or locks, because the user experience is so bad?
I think in the long run, yeah, I do. But the question that I think really comes up is, now it gets back into the hardware and the software and the value of the hardware, right? And where do manufacturers sit in there? Because is it, if you're leveraging this software with this hardware and there is a partnership piece in there, who's driving the poor interaction? Is it a lack of responsiveness on the hardware side, or is it a lack of functionality on the software side? And so I think it's a very interesting topic that we should bring up, of who's at fault in that scenario if the experience is poor, right?
At fault, or like even to the point, does the value of the hardware, are we seeing a decrease in that? Because you can, this is where my conversation with like Mercury at this point is like, at that point it's a software game, right? Because as long as the hardware supports whatever software is looking to go on there, what does it do to the value of the hardware if any software works with? I don't know. I'm not making any declarations. All I know is it's interesting to think about.
Me either. And I think that's, as a manufacturer, that's something we grapple with, right? It's not just about hardware development and R&D on the hardware side. It is R&D on the software side, and R&D on the API side, and frankly R&D on the partnership side, right? Yeah, maybe not on creating a product per se, but creating a partnership and creating successful support. And as you see these ecosystems expand, if your organization isn't the first call, how do you ensure that the level of support that's being provided meets your expectations and your standards, and have you trained that partner in order so that they can support your product in that level? And so I think that raises a whole nother conversation, not just about rip and replace, but how did it get to that point? right? And if we do truly get to that point where there is rip and replace of hardware, I think that means there was a failure prior to that point, right? And how do we manage that? And
yeah, no doubt. And it changes the way people buy, service, the expectation, like all that stuff. So, this is why I think this vertical conversation will expand now our opportunity to really discuss things that are related and not related, but across all of them on that end. So, all right, so that's a flavor of what we're going to do. I guess I just thought of something while we're sitting here. I'm going to toss this to you, Colin. So I wrote on this piece of paper here 1, 2, and 3 with a vertical next to it. And so to discuss the next conversation that we're going to have, where we'll spend the time just on this vertical, you pick number 1, 2, or 3, what number, and then I'll tell you what vertical that is.
Oh, I'm just picking a number.
Pick a number, and then I'll tell you the vertical. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Perfect. Cool. I thought you were going to put me on the spot of picking the vertical.
Number.
2.
All right. Good. I was hoping. All right. Next week or the week after, however often we do this, we're going to talk about the enterprise. That was number 2. Number 1 was hospitality. Number 3 was K through 12. You picked enterprise. Okay. So next week or week after, we'll talk about the enterprise. We'll dig into it deep. Maybe we'll have a guest on to speak specifically to the enterprise itself, and we'll dive into some of these conversations. So thank you, Colin, for joining me on this ride. I enjoy doing this with you, so I'm glad we're going to continue to do it. I'm excited about this new topic on top of what we have here being vertical specific. So till next time, we'll see you on the Verts.
Awesome.
All right.
Sounds good.
Thank you.